Hello, thank you all. So, quick repeat of some of what you just heard. My name is Dawn. I'm the Director of Product and Solution Marketing at Catchpoint. And it may seem a little bit odd that somebody that's in marketing is talking at a SRE conference, but one of the big projects I worked on earlier this year is this survey of SREs. And it wasn't just people with SRE in their title, because a lot of people feel that they're an SRE, even though that's not what their title actually says. And we had some really interesting responses when it came to titles. The overall results in the survey, we had a little over 400 people respond to the survey. And then it was weeks of analyzing the data, using pivot tables and all other types of methods to look at this and see what findings we could come up with. And one of the reasons we did this is to understand what SRE is. And I found this tweet earlier this month, where you're looking at things and people that are SREs think SRE is one thing, and everybody else thinks it's something else. And maybe people think that, oh, it's this magical happy place where everything always works, when in fact it doesn't always work that way. There was a second picture to this thread where it was Lucille Ball and the Candy Factory. So if you know that episode where candy keeps coming on this conveyor belt and they're just eating it nonstop because things are broken and they need a way to fix it. So we launched this survey partially because there's this great book. Who's read the book? About 50% of the people. So there's this really good book that was written by a group of people from Google that talks about the way they do SRE. But this is the way that one company does SRE. And what I found from talking to people at Google, right before we started the survey, was even SRE teams at Google do things differently. There's not one consistent way that every single team does it. They all have their own way of doing things. And so we did this survey, and the goal was to find out who is this elusive site reliability engineer. And one of the quotes that came back to me from this was really interesting. And it really sums up why we did this survey. And it says, the SRE role changes from organization to organization. Even though the role was defined at Google, organizations have incorporated the rules differently. Because of this, there can be confusion of the SRE role versus pre-existing operations roles. This confusion can lead to a misrepresentation of the SRE role to non-SREs. This usually creates toil for the SREs, as SREs end up having to do stories that may not be under the scope of SRE, or will have to push back on stories that are not under the scope. Does that sound at all familiar to your life as an SRE? Okay, seeing quite a few heads nodding. It was interesting to me when in the survey results we had a field at the end that said, anything else you want us to know. The number of people that told me to go read the book was amazing. I did read the book. And I read the book and I thought, well, what are the other ways that this can possibly be done? And so I did read the book. For those that were questioning whether I have read the book, but I wanted to know more. And so that's kind of where this survey came in. And I really liked what was said this morning by John and Corey, where they said, don't just do things because you read it in a book, or because somebody on a stage said to do it, or because you read a blog. You need to look at what aspects work for your organization and what aspects don't, and modify it to suit your needs. The SRE role is relatively new. I mean, people might argue it's been at Google for about 15 years, but in the grand scheme of technology and jobs, SRE is new. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, those careers and professions have been around for a lot longer than SRE has. But there's so many jobs out there. And if you read through job descriptions, I just picked some picked these off of Glassdoor. All the job descriptions are different. There's some pieces that are the same, but there's a lot that's very different. So understanding what people mean when they say SRE is very important. Who responded to the survey? I said there were about 400 people. I think it was 416 responses that we counted. There were a number of responses that we excluded. One of the first questions we asked was, do you feel that your day-to-day job duties reflect those of an SRE? And if people said no, then we discounted their responses. People see surveys and they respond to them. We had people that were like physical therapists and students and other stuff that were responding like, don't want to include those in the survey. So we excluded, I believe it was 12 responses where they said, no, I don't do SRE work. I'm like, okay. So the breakdown, as expected, it was primarily North America, but there were a good number of responses from Europe, a smaller number from Asia. When you look at technology trends in general, this is pretty representative across surveys in technology. We use an open-ended question for role because roles are very different, and we know there's a lot of people that are doing SRE work that don't have an SRE title. So we allowed people to put in what their title was, and we ended up with over 200 unique titles. Now, some of that comes from people writing out senior versus abbreviating senior, but the broad number of titles was surprising. Some organizations get very, very granular with their SRE titles. We saw people with cloud site reliability engineer titles. There was an application SRE, device services SREs. So people can get really, really broad and really, really granular with their titles. So we took all of those titles and kind of created some categories. If people said that they were a systems administrator, we didn't group them in SRE. In order to be SRE, you actually had to have a title that had site reliability engineer or SRE in it. If it was a more traditional title, we put that under infrastructure and operations. You might see this list of 200 titles and come up with different categorizations of it, but this is what seemed to make sense to us as we were looking at it. We did separate out managers, directors, and executives into their own category because we wanted to see if there's a difference between what leadership thinks and what practitioners think. So if there was SRE manager, they weren't classified as an SRE, they were classified as a manager because we felt that the manager, we wanted them in that bucket. We had responses from lots of different sized organizations. SRE isn't just something that's happening in like the Googles and LinkedIns of the world. Small startups are doing it as well. There was one respondent that said they were the only person, so they did all of the jobs. Like, okay, I can see that, but I don't know that you're an SRE if you're doing it all. So we did have a pretty good distribution across company employee sizes. And we went back and forth on whether or not to look at industry. Classifying companies is really difficult. You can look up industry classifications, and you have some lists that are, 25 categories long. But coming up with a way that would make sense from a grouping perspective, we came up with this list. There was a lot that fell into other. A lot of people from Google indicated that they were from Google, and then they put down their category as other, and in the field, like, we're Google. We don't fit into any of these categories, which is kind of the struggle with doing these classifications. It's easy if you're a retail, like, yes, I sell stuff on my website. I understand what that is. Yes, I'm a news site. Those are easier to classify, but some companies are really hard to classify. When we do this again next year, I don't know that we'd use the same classifications for industries. It was interesting to see some of the differences in SREs across industry, especially in financial services. But it wasn't enough to make it be like the complexity around asking the industry question. I don't know that we got as much value out of it. Anytime you do a survey, there are assumptions and biases that go into it. The creation of the survey questions, the analysis of it, as well as the people that are answering them. And this doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It's just saying, like, this is the perspective from where I am, and this is the perspective of where the survey takers are. We tried to not dwell on a lot of, well, like, we think this is going to be the answer. We asked questions. We went to a lot of people and asked them to review the questions. Are we asking the right things? Is there anything that we've missed? And we went through a lot of that. So we asked a lot of SREs before we even started the survey what was going on. But even with that, we got comments that, like, these questions didn't make sense. We didn't understand what was being asked. It was more like, this is more talking about DevOps than SRE. All those issues came up. We'll try to address that better in the next round of surveys. So if there's anybody that wants to review questions to make sure that we're asking the right questions the next time around, let me know. We'll be happy to have you part of that. And one of the assumptions is, Catchpoint's a monitoring company. We sell synthetic and real user monitoring solutions. We didn't have the survey focus on that, but I know from an SRE perspective, a lot of what's being done is monitoring. So how many of you do monitoring on a regular basis? About 3/4 of the room. So it's a big part of the SRE role, or at least that was the assumption that we had going into this. And so we asked the question, like, what are the primary uses? And people are like, yep, we're using monitoring data. We're doing all of these things. But then when we asked the question of, like, what tools are the most important for you, the monitoring tools were the least important. And this is really puzzling to me, because if you're doing all of this monitoring and you're using all of this data, why are these tools the least important? And I think the assumption and the bias from my perspective is, like, I focus on the tools and I categorize them as these are monitoring tools. We also asked for alerting and notification tools, and that was the #1 tool, by and large. So the perspective or bias on this is, from my perspective, the tools that are doing the alerting and the notification are the monitoring tools. But for the SREs, they're not necessarily considered monitoring tools. They're considered the tools that alert me and notify me. Yes, they're doing monitoring. That's the function of the tool, but why they're doing it is the alerting and notification. So there was just an interesting result from the survey based on, like, the bias of my perspective and then the bias of the people that are in the SRE role. So some of the key takeaways. The first one I've called, stop looking for a unicorn. There is no perfect candidate. There is no SRE that knows all of the things and has all of the answers. A good team of SREs has a cross-section of multiple technical skills, to the point where not a single individual has to have all of the skills. If you're really good at automation and somebody else is really good at programming, that's great. The two of you combined, working together as a team, makes the strongest SRE organization. So coming up with a job description that lists 25 skills, like, this is what's needed. You don't need all of those 25 skills. You need some of those 25 skills. You probably need to be an expert in 1 or 2 of them, but you don't need to know everything. Nobody can possibly know everything. Studies have shown for a long time that more diverse teams are more successful. We went back and forth on whether or not to ask diversity questions in the survey, in terms of gender and in terms of race. In the end, after we're doing a lot of research and thinking about what value would that show, would there be any surprises in that, we felt that we were pretty sure that the results were going to come back where the majority of respondents were men. But does that mean that men make better SREs? No. It's just the nature of where things are. So we decided not to ask questions related to that. We did, however, ask for background information and how long people were working in the role. And from a background perspective, not everybody in the SRE role has a computer science or a technical degree. There were a lot of people with kind of more liberal arts, humanities backgrounds. Some of my favorite studies that people had in college are listed here. Like, people studied music performance, and now they're an SRE. I'd like to see them incorporate music into, their problem resolution. People studied psychology and criminology, English literature and fiction writing. Sometimes when you're writing a post-incident response, using a little bit of fiction may help in there. It's not about having people that are like top of their class in a computer science degree or a technical degree. Look beyond what they studied in school and look at what they're able to do today. I am in marketing in a technical company, and I have a degree in psychology and education. So very different courses of life and make you end up in your careers. We looked at the number of years people were working in tech. Is the SRE a role that you can get right out of college, or do you need a little bit more experience? There were some people that said it was their first job, but that's a very, very small percentage of people. The SRE role seems to be targeted as people in their mid-careers. They've been working in tech for about 5 years already or more. I didn't do the analysis, and I will after, now that I'm thinking about it, of, if we took out leadership, the people that were in the leadership roles, how does this change? Because this includes people that were in leadership, management, and non-management roles. So it's okay in a job description to say, we want people that have, a minimum of 5 years experience, because that's what it looks like the majority of SREs have. It's not something that comes with, your first job. You need to get your feet wet. You need to learn a little bit more. Second key takeaway. Site reliability engineering is not a cure for broken culture. You can't take a team and automatically say, okay, you're now an SRE team, and that'll fix whatever problems that you have broken in your company. Got some really, really interesting comments about organizational arrangement. Unless the organization itself is aimed for success, being an SRE is like being a daycare assistant. If this describes your company, the SRE role isn't going to fix the constant care and feeding and managing of small screaming children. A lot of articles and information on SRE talks about the tools, and I mentioned this earlier as well, like what tools are you using? You could be using all these tools. You can be like, great, in order to be an SRE, we need to have alerting and notification systems, we need to have a version control system, and we need to be using Slack. You don't need those tools. Those tools don't make the SRE team. They help them achieve their jobs. They help you do what you need to do. But if you're doing those things, it's not about the tools. It's a lot more than the tools. I love metrics and math and data. So we asked what metrics are used to define success. And I realized kind of after the survey went out that it should have been 3 individual questions, and we unfortunately grouped it all in one. So the next time around, I'd want to see what are individual metrics for success, team, and organizational metrics for success, because they're going to change and they're going to be different. Wasn't really a surprise that number of incidents and MTTR were 2 of the top metrics that were reported. I was, however, surprised to see revenue in the top 5. And it made me happy to see revenue in the top 5, because from an organizational level, my guess is that your CEO, your board of directors, whoever it is at the top, that's the number that they care about. They care about how much money your company's making. The number of incidents are important, but it's how do those incidents impact how much money is being made. So to be able to recognize that revenue is a really important metric is really good. There were some other write-in answers that made me smile. People said that customer satisfaction and happiness were two of the metrics that they were using. I want to know how they're measuring happiness, because I think everybody should be measured on how happy they can make other people. With the good comes the bad. Going back to kind of this broken culture of metrics and are we really doing the right thing? There were a lot of people that said, we don't have metrics. They're stupid. We have no idea what we're doing in this area. This is a problem. Like, you need to first figure out what those metrics are before you go and say, like, how are we going to determine success? And is this something that can be gamed? Does this make sense? Yeah, fix the metrics. One piece that came out in a lot of the comments was this feeling of a lack of respect. How many of you feel like you're respected by, your organization and what you do? Okay, about 50%. But there's a lot of people that don't feel that way. There were comments about the role's important. It's really critical to making sure that systems are up and we're doing what we need to do, but it's not valued within the organization. We have a difficult time making people understand what it is we do and why we do it and how we do it. When there's a lack of respect, that causes a number of things. It causes people to leave the company, which is not something you necessarily want. It also causes, on a personal side, with people that don't feel respect, physical and mental health issues. So we really want to find a way to make sure that people are feeling respected and valued in the role. Lots of comments about the hero mentality and the need to remove this hero mentality. And one of the quotes really jumped out at me. And it said, waking up at 3 a.m. and solving an outage by resetting connections to a database that got hung up by a new application not closing threads should not make you a hero. Rather, everyone should have empathy for the rough night you had and help you to ensure the proper documentation is written first so that anyone can pick up that task if it arises again. And then move on to automating that fix. Practicing the runbook in a controlled manner for the team, writing alerts that catch and auto-resolve this before it happens again. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and it's everyone's job to improve themselves and those around them. Don't settle for, but you're a rock star, as a reason to run down your own health and sanity. Being able to solve problems is a critical piece of what the SRE does. But once that problem is solved, how do you take that knowledge and make sure that whatever broke doesn't happen again, or that somebody else understands how you were able to fix it so that they can do it again? Do you have practices in place that says, okay, we didn't catch this, the alerts weren't configured properly, so we've got to set up new alerts, change thresholds? Is that part of your process? And if not, maybe it should be, and maybe that can help address some of these concerns that people have in terms of not feeling like they're respected. The third takeaway, communicate clearly regarding expectations and responsibilities. For the most part, people said that communication was good, that they were able to, they were on the same page, there wasn't discrepancies between what managers thought and what they thought, but a lot of people also feel that it's really hard to communicate the role within the organization. Some people said, I really wish there was a document that said, this is what SRE does. And I was like, wait a minute, what about those people that told you to read the book? It's they need to talk to one another. Having good communication is one of the key aspects to the SRE role. And that goes starting with looking at what is the expectation of how much time you spend writing code versus solving problems. Best practice, according to the book and everything else I've ever seen written on SRE, is it should be a 50-50 split between writing code and resolving issues and doing care and feeding of applications. And that's roughly what we saw, where most were in 50%. But what surprised me with this histogram was the drops at 40 and 60%. So I don't know if this was a bias and a viewpoint of the respondents were if it's close enough to 50%, I'm going to say it's 50%, because if it's at 40, now I really want it to be 50-50. So I don't know if that was part of it, but it's just really interesting to see this drop in the histogram right there. If you are at a 50-50 split, great. But if your organization isn't, if you're at an 80-20 split, be honest with that when you're recruiting and hiring SREs. Don't say that there's a 50-50 split if there isn't. Look at what it is in your organization and own it. And say, hey, other companies are able to do 50-50, but they have 200 or 300 SREs in their organization. We have 3 in our organization, so it's not going to be the split. It's going to be a little bit different. So again, look at the context and do what's right for your organization. We broke the managers and executives out because we wanted to see if there were differences in what the expectations were. And I was really happy to see that there wasn't really changes, that there was agreement between what the top technical skills are for an SRE. If management said one list and SRE said another, that was going to open up a giant can of worms that I didn't want to go into with the analysis. So from a technical perspective, these are the top 5, and this was across industries. In the report, we break it down into the industries. There is some change from industry to industry, but it's not major. There's just a few things that pop into some industries and not others. You have to read the report to find that out. And we also asked for non-technical skills. Now, I have an issue with the term non-technical. I have an issue with the term soft skills. These are skills. These are just as technical as the technical skills, but they're not classified that way. So we called them non-technical skills because I haven't come up with a better word for it. I'm thinking of one, and if I ever come up with one, or if you have one, let me know. But we had a giant list of these non-technical or soft skills. And the top 5 were here. The bottom 3, which I have not reported on previously, were empathy, decisiveness. I'm sorry, those are the bottom 2. They were basically tied for empathy and decisiveness. And the empathy one kind of surprised me, because a lot of the responses were saying, we need empathy. People need to have empathy. But yet, it's not one of the top skills. It's that the other people need to have empathy for the hard work that the SREs are doing, but the SREs don't need the empathy themselves? Or is it that it's just not necessary to be successful in the job? From a teamwork perspective, I think you can't have a good team. You can't communicate well unless you have empathy. So maybe it's woven in to all of that, or maybe, again, that's one of my biases shining through in here. And the skills are going to vary, and you're going to find issues and things that you don't know. This is another very recent tweet that really summed up some of this, that frustration is going to happen, and it can bring you to the brink of tears. It may make you want to quit your job, to leave, to go live on a deserted island and not talk to anybody ever again. This happens. It doesn't matter if you're just starting out in your career or if you've been doing this for many, many years. Understanding what your individual strengths are and where you need to grow is an important part of the SRE role. There's this book by an author, Carol Dweck, called Mindset. And it talks about people's ability to learn and grow and change. And there's two types of people. There are people with what's called the growth mindset and people with what's called a fixed mindset. And those with the fixed mindset think that it's black or white. I either can do it or I can't do it. Those with a growth mindset think if I work harder and I practice, I'll get better. It's not an innate ability. Being an SRE is not an innate thing. It's not something you either know or you don't know. It's something that you work at, you practice, and you continue to learn. And from reading through a lot of the responses, I feel like the best SREs are those with this growth mindset that feel like I always want to be learning something new. I want new challenges. It's not, if it broke and I wasn't able to fix it, that's not a reflection of me. It's just something I have yet to learn. So looking at that growth mindset is one of the most important characteristics of the SRE. Fourth takeaway. Maybe this should have been the first takeaway. I don't know. Prioritization. There's no one right way to SRE. The role encompasses so many skills and responsibilities across so many different sizes of organization that there shouldn't be a single definition of the role. There shouldn't be this, oh, this is right and everything else is wrong. No, it's right for your organization for where you are today. As you change and grow and mature, that role may change. Going back to Corey and John's talk, they had that maturity quadrants. We're like, there's 4 different ways of doing things. You can move, but you can figure out what that SRE maturity is for your organization. This is a bad headline for this article. I saw this and I cringed. I'm like, oh no. Really bad headline, but it's actually a really good article talking about SLIs and SLOs and how to do them. It's not about somebody else is doing it wrong. The article talks about how to set SLIs and SLOs. So don't look at this headline and be like, they're right, I'm wrong. No. There is no one right way of doing this. One of my favorite parts of this was hearing the joy and love that SREs have for their job. Here's some of the bias coming in, and people admitted it. So this is the best damn role in tech. They realize that's a little bit subjective. We had a lot of other people say very simply, it's awesome. It's the best mix of skills. You're working with some of the brightest and best people in the field. Even though there's this pain and confusion, people in the SRE role really, really like it. So you want to harness that, and you want to find people that can be happy and do all of that for you. This is kind of a shirt that we're creating at Catchpoint for future conferences and giveaways, where we look at the internet as this amazing place, but it hasn't yet reached its full potential. There's so much more that we can do, but we can only do it together. The SREs are a critical piece of making the internet a better place. And so we want to work with you, and we want you to work with others in your organization to help make the internet better. So I'll leave you with the ideal SRE job description based on the survey findings. The majority of people have a bachelor's degree at least 2 years in operations or software engineering. Verbal and written communication skills are an absolute must for the role, as well as problem solving and a passion for technology. A few required skills with one of them, and I probably should put the eagerness to learn at the top of this, is an eagerness to learn. Anything else is a nice to have. This is what's required to make the ideal SRE. We're doing another survey right now, not focused solely on SREs, but general monitoring, and I will post this on Twitter afterwards. You can download a full copy of the report here. Thank you very much.